Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was just starting to bleed over the edge of the Pinal Mountains when Prescott Traylor rode into the ghost-quiet valley with nothing but his horse, a rifle, and a heart still split down the middle. His heart had not been right since the war. He had seen too much, lost too much, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, Clara, the girl who had waited on the porch every Sunday until the letter came instead of him. Prescott had not stayed anywhere longer than a season since. He had become a man more comfortable with silence than company, more used to sleeping under stars than a roof. But that morning, as he reached the edge of the Waverly homestead where smoke curled from a chimney and the cry of a child pierced the stillness, something shifted. Something he did not expect. A woman burst out of the cabin, skirts gathered, her hair tangled like she had not slept in days. A rifle was in her hands, and she aimed it straight at him. "Stop right there," she said, voice strong but shaking. "Do not come any closer." Prescott raised his hands. "I am not here to cause trouble. I saw smoke. I thought, maybe someone needed help." The woman's eyes narrowed. "And you just came riding up like some hero out of a dime novel?" "I do not read novels," he said, lips tugging into something that might have been a smile if he still remembered how. "Name is Prescott Traylor. I am just passing through." She studied him like she was trying to see through to the marrow of his bones. Then, slowly, she lowered the rifle. "I am Ada Waverly," she said, "and you are lucky. If you had come 5 minutes earlier, you would have walked into a mess of coyotes fighting over my chickens." She turned and walked back toward the cabin without another word. Prescott hesitated, then dismounted and led his horse to the hitching post. Inside, the cabin was small but clean. The smell of wood smoke and stale bread filled the air. 2 children sat on the floor, one girl, maybe 6, and a boy no older than 4. Their faces were smudged, their eyes wide. "Florence, take your brother to the back room," Ada said softly. The girl nodded, grabbing the boy's hand and disappearing behind a curtain. "They yours?" Prescott asked. Ada nodded. "Their father left 6 months ago. Promised to send money from Denver. Never did. I figure he is not planning on coming back." Prescott nodded slowly. He had seen that kind of abandonment before. "You holding this place on your own?" "I am doing what has to be done," she said, crossing her arms. "The land is paid for, but I have barely enough to feed the children, let alone fix the roof or keep the fences up. The well pump broke 2 days ago. But I will manage." Her eyes dared him to pity her. "I am not offering charity," Prescott said, "but I can fix a pump. And I am not much for talking, so I reckon we will get along just fine." Ada watched him for a long moment, then nodded. "You fix the pump, I will feed you supper. That is the deal." By nightfall, the pump was working, the water running clean and cold. The children cheered. Ada stood with her arms crossed, watching Prescott like he was a puzzle she could not quite solve. "You always fix broken things?" she asked as they sat by the fire, her voice softer now. "Not always," he said, staring into the flames. "Some things stay broken." She was quiet for a time. Then she said, "Florence still asks about her father. I tell her he went to find work. I do not know what I will say when she is older." Prescott looked over at her. "You are doing right by them. That is more than most." Ada gave him a tired smile. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A man with a past does not usually ride up offering to fix things. Not without wanting something in return." "I do not want anything," Prescott said. Then after a moment, "Except maybe to sleep under a roof tonight." She nodded. "You can take the cot. I will be up with the baby if he cries again." That night, Prescott lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling. He listened to the quiet sounds of the cabin, the wind outside, the creak of the rafters, the soft breath of sleeping children. And then, faintly, the sound of Ada humming something low and slow to her son. It was not a song he knew, but it settled something in his chest that had been restless for years. Over the next 2 weeks, Prescott stayed. He patched the roof, mended the fence, chopped wood for the stove. Ada let him, though she never asked him to. They moved around each other like two people not used to being close. But slowly, the space between them began to shrink. One afternoon, as he was splitting wood, Florence came bouncing out of the house. "Mr. Traylor," she said, tugging his sleeve. "Can I help?" He handed her a smaller piece and showed her how to hold it. She giggled when the axe was too heavy and nearly tipped her over. Ada watched from the porch, arms folded, a strange look on her face. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ada said, "Florence asked if you were staying for Christmas." Prescott looked down at his hands. "That is some time away yet." "She said you feel like family," Ada said quietly. He looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was tired, but strong. Her eyes held stories she had not told yet. And something else, something that had not been there before. "Hope. I could stay through winter," he said. "If that is all right with you." She nodded, slowly. "All right," she said. "But you split the firewood. I am not doing it alone." He smiled. This time it stayed on his face a little longer. By the end of the month, the children stopped calling him Mr. Florence called him Prescott. Her brother, Finn, just called him P. Prescott built a new chicken coop. Ada made molasses biscuits and set them in his hands without a word. Some nights, she would sit beside him on the porch, their arms just touching, and they would watch the stars rise over the mountains. One night, as the fire crackled low, she broke the silence. "I was not planning on letting anyone back into my life," she said. "Not after what he did. I swore I would never trust another man again." Prescott's voice was quiet, steady. "I thought my heart was done too. I buried it with Clara. But I think I was just waiting to find someone who could see it was still beating." Ada turned to him, her eyes shining. "You think it is still beating?" He took her hand. "I know it." And in that moment, with the firelight dancing across their faces and the sound of her children sleeping safe inside, Prescott thought for the first time in years that maybe he had finally come home. The first frost came earlier than anyone expected. Prescott rose before the light, breath clouding in the cold air, and went straight out to check the livestock. A thin sheet of ice had glazed over the water trough, and the mule kept lifting its nose and snorting in protest. He broke the ice with the back edge of a shovel, careful not to startle the animal. Inside, Ada was already at the stove, sleeves rolled over her elbows, stirring cornmeal into a pot with one hand while keeping the baby balanced on her hip with the other. "You're up early," she said without looking over. "Frost hit the trough. Thought I'd better see to it before the sun did." He rubbed his hands near the stove's edge. "Ground's gone stiff. You'll want to cover the greens tonight if you mean to keep what's left." Ada nodded, shifting the baby to her other arm. "I'll send Florence out after lessons to lay down the burlap. She's better at remembering what matters than most grown folks I've known." Prescott chuckled low in his chest. "She's got grit." Ada finally turned to face him. "She's got too much of me in her. That's not always a good thing." "You ever think maybe it is?" he asked. She didn't answer right away, just dipped the ladle into the pot and poured some into a bowl. She handed it over, and something passed between them, quiet understanding, like they were both slowly learning how to carry weight with someone else beside them. Later that day, Prescott stripped bark from a stack of pine logs he'd set aside for a new shed. The wind had picked up, dry and sharp, blowing dust across the yard. Ada came out with a shawl wrapped tight, her hair pinned up in a way he hadn't seen before, tucked neat behind her ears, showing the curve of her neck. "I've been meaning to ask," she said, standing just outside the reach of the flying bark. "What made you ride west?" He paused, the drawknife still in hand. "I didn't know where else to go." "That's not really an answer." He leaned the tool against the log. "I came across the Mississippi looking for something I'd lost. Thought maybe if I kept moving, I'd stop feeling it missing." Ada stepped closer, arms crossed. "Did it work?" "Not until I stopped," he said. "Not until I fixed that pump." Her expression didn't change, but she didn't look away. "I never thought someone would stay long enough to know what this place looks like in winter. I reckon I'll find out soon enough." They stood in silence, the wind tugging at the corners of her shawl. Then Florence called from the house, asking if she could show Prescott what she'd written that morning. "I'll be there in a minute," he called back. Ada was still watching him. "She's taken to you. Both of them have. You all right with that?" "I think I'm trying to be." That night, the wind howled hard enough to rattle the shutters. Prescott stayed up with a lantern, checking each window frame and nailing down any loose boards. He didn't say anything when he found the back door had swollen against the frame, just planed it down and re-hung it before dawn. When Ada found him asleep at the kitchen table, sawdust in his collar and a hammer still at his hip, she didn't wake him. Instead, she poured a cup of coffee, set it near his hand, and watched him sleep for a few seconds longer than she meant to. The days shortened. The work pressed in tighter. Prescott traded a set of rabbit pelts for flour and beans down at the trading post, and when he returned, Florence ran to meet him with a drawing she'd made of the four of them, stick figures with wide round heads, standing in front of a crooked house. "You got my shoulders about right," Prescott said, crouching beside her. Ada stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching as Florence leaned into Prescott's side like it had always been hers to do. She didn't speak until after the children had gone inside. "That drawing," she said quietly. "I didn't think it'd ever look like that again." Prescott looked up at her. "I didn't think I'd be part of anyone's picture again." Ada stepped down one stair, then another, arms still folded. "I've been trying to forget how much I wanted someone to come back. And then you knocked on my world like it was nothing." "I didn't mean to change anything," he said. "But you did. And I keep waiting for the part where you say you're leaving." "I'm not," he said simply. She didn't ask why, just nodded once and walked past him into the house. But as she passed, her fingers brushed lightly against the back of his hand. Just once. It was enough. That night, Prescott sat outside long after everyone else had gone to bed. The stars were sharp and still above the mountains. He could hear the soft creak of the windmill, the faint breath of the land settling into sleep. He had thought his heart was done with hope. But here, in this small corner of Arizona territory, with a woman who didn't ask for tenderness but gave it anyway, he'd begun to believe it might not be too late to start again. And this time he'd stay. Prescott stood in the corn stubble beside the shed, sleeves rolled past his elbows, sawing through the last of the dry boards he'd been fitting for a shelter wall. The wind had backed off since morning, and the air had the stillness that came before snow. He could smell it, metallic and faint, like water over stone. He paused, pressing his palm flat to the lumber, feeling the grit beneath his skin. Behind him, the door creaked open. "You've been out here since before breakfast," Ada said. He glanced over his shoulder. She wore her cloak, the clasp crooked at her collarbone, and there was a trace of ash on her fingers. "Didn't want the cold to set into the wood before I finished." Ada stepped down from the porch, boots crunching dry leaves. "I made coffee. It's probably bitter. I burned the first pot." "Burnt coffee's still coffee." She held out the tin cup. "You always this agreeable?" "I wasn't. Not for a long time." Ada tilted her head. What changed? He took the cup, wrapping both hands around it. I stopped waiting to feel like I deserved something good. She looked at him for a moment, like she was weighing her next words. I've got a letter from my sister in Missouri. First one in 3 years. He didn't ask why it had been so long. She doing all right? She married a shopkeeper. Has 2 little girls now. She says if I come east, she'll make room for us. He sipped the coffee, the bitterness sharp against his tongue. You thinking about it? I was. Before. She met his eyes. Now I'm not certain what I'd be leaving behind. Prescott watched the way her fingers curled into the edge of her cloak. You'd be leaving a man who doesn't want to ride away anymore. You'd stay. Her voice was low, uncertain. I already am. Ada looked down at her boots. This land's hard. It doesn't give much, not without a fight. I've fought for less. She looked up again. I don't need saving. Good, he said. I don't have it in me to save anyone. But I can stand beside you. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind had picked up again, tugging softly at the edge of her cloak. Then a high voice called from inside the house. Ma. Finn spilled the ink. Ada turned toward the door. Coming, she called, then glanced back at Prescott. You sure about standing beside me? Because it includes ink on the walls and chickens in the kitchen. He gave a quiet huff through his nose. I've seen worse. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened, and then she was gone through the doorway, her footsteps light on the floorboards. Later that afternoon, while Florence practiced her letters and Finn napped curled in the crook of a quilt, Prescott trimmed kindling near the stove. Ada stood beside the frame of the front window, mending a hem with the light slanting across her hands. I used to think a man would have to be perfect, she said. Steady, clean-shaven, always knowing what to say. You disappointed? No. I'm relieved. He looked up. I never trusted perfect men, she said. They came with polished boots and lies. You come with calluses and quiet. Prescott set the knife down. You don't mind quiet? She folded the fabric once, twice. I've had enough noise to last a lifetime. The stove clicked as the metal settled. The room held warm, easy silence. That night, Prescott lingered outside after supper, watching snow begin to fall in slow, meandering flakes. The chickens had gone quiet, and the mule had bedded down. He thought of the years he'd spent trying to outrun absence, how it had shaped him into something hollow and cautious. But here, now, with the sound of Ada's voice behind the door and the weight of a home he hadn't known he was building, something inside him had begun to regrow. Ada came out with a blanket around her shoulders, stepping beside him without a word. They stood together under the eaves, snow catching in her hair. I've never seen the first snow without dread, she said. Prescott looked at her. Still feel it? No, she said. Not tonight. He reached for her hand. Not fast, not uncertain, just steady. She let him take it. And in that stillness, beneath the soft hush of falling snow, something passed between them that required no explanation. Not a promise, not a question. Just a quiet, certain knowing. She leaned into him, her shoulder against his chest, and he wrapped his arm around her with a gentleness that came not from fear, but from earned care. The snow kept falling. The night deepened, and for the first time, Prescott felt the ache in his chest settle into something whole. Not healed by forgetting, but mended by presence, by shared days, shared work, and the quiet strength of a woman who had given him a place to belong. The sky stayed low and gray for 3 days straight, the kind of weather that pressed against the windows and made the walls feel closer. Prescott spent most of that time inside, helping Florence sound out her letters and keeping Finn distracted with carved animals he shaped from pine scraps. Ada worked at the mending pile with steady hands, her shoulders drawn close as though she carried more than the weight of thread and fabric. By the fourth morning, the clouds had thinned, and sunlight spilled across the yard in long gold streaks. Prescott stepped out onto the porch and took a slow breath, the air sharp with wood smoke and thawed earth. Ada joined him, her shawl draped over one arm, a pair of gloves clutched in her hand. "I need to ride to the creek," she said. "There's a patch of wild mint that only grows along the eastern bend. I dry it for winter colds." He nodded. "I'll hitch the mule. I can manage it." "I know," he said, "but I'd still like to come." She didn't argue. They rode out together, the mule carrying the baskets while Prescott took his gelding. The trail was narrow and overgrown, slipping between cottonwoods and rocky scrub. Neither spoke much. The quiet between them was no longer cautious, it had grown into something companionable, shaped by the rhythm of shared work and the days that stacked behind them. When they reached the bend, Ada dismounted and crouched low to examine the mint. Prescott tied the animals and wandered along the edge of the water, watching the slow swirl of ice breaking apart in the current. "You ever think about your people?" she asked behind him. He looked back. "You mean my family?" Ada nodded, not looking up from the leaves she was gathering. "You've never spoken of them." He crouched beside her. "My father died in Tennessee. Consumption took him slow. My mother passed before I turned 17. After the war, I tried to go back, but the house had been burned out. Nothing left but char and chimney stone." Ada's hands stilled. "You came west after that?" "I couldn't stay where nothing remembered me." She didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, "I used to think that if I could just keep the children fed and the roof over us, that would be enough. But it turns out I miss being seen." Prescott brushed snow from the edge of a flat stone. "You are Ada. Every day." She looked at him then, direct and steady, her eyes catching the light like river glass. "I know. That's why I'm afraid." "What of?" "If I let myself believe this can last, and it doesn't if you ride away come spring, then I'll have to explain to them why people leave again." He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak until the wind eased. "I won't promise something I can't hold to," he said, "but I've spent too long running from places that never felt like home. This does." "You do." She stood slowly, brushing her hands clean, and offered him a basket. "Then help me gather the rest. The snow's coming again before sundown." They returned with the sun dipping low, their baskets filled and their coats damp at the hems. Prescott unpacked the mule while Ada went inside to check the stew. When he stepped through the door, the scent of thyme and boiled potatoes filled the cabin. "I'll take the baskets to the loft," he said. Ada turned from the stove. "You don't have to keep doing everything." "I don't mind." "I know," she said. "That's part of the trouble." He paused at the foot of the ladder. "You want me to stop?" "No," she said. "I want to learn how to let you." That night, after the children were asleep, she sat beside him on the rug, a shawl wrapped around her knees. The fire cracked low, and her face was flush with warmth and something else, something unguarded. "I buried a part of myself the day he left," she said. "Told myself I'd survive by staying closed. But you've been here, steady as the hills, and it's making it hard to remember why I ever thought I had to stay alone." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb brushing the back of her fingers like tracing the edge of something delicate but real. She didn't pull away. "I don't need fixing," she said. "I wouldn't try," he replied. "But I'd stand with you while you mend your own pieces." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and for a long time, neither of them moved. The fire dropped low, and the wind pressed soft against the walls, but inside, everything held quiet and sure. Prescott had thought his heart was beyond repair, a thing too splintered to carry again. But the weight of Ada's hand in his, the warmth of her trust slowly unfolding it all told him different. This wasn't patchwork. This was something stronger than what had come before. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a thing to fear. It felt like something he might build one day at a time with her. The thaw came slow that spring, reluctant and muddy. For weeks, the yard stayed soft underfoot, every step leaving a print. Prescott spent long hours hauling rock from the creek bed to shore up the path to the barn, while Ada worked the soil with a hoe worn smooth from use. The children took turns turning over clumps with sticks, their laughter rising like birdsong, high and sudden in the stillness of the valley. One morning, Ada found Prescott at the edge of the field, staring at the ground with a furrowed brow and a stake in his hand. "You planning to plant something?" she asked, brushing a loose curl from her cheek. He looked up slowly. "I was thinking about laying a row of beans. Thought I'd try my hand at it. Never figured you for planting. Never figured I'd have soil worth planting into." She didn't answer that, just came to stand beside him and pointed toward the fence line. "Best son's there. Just keep them away from the squash, or you'll be chasing vines come July." He moved the stake without argument. That evening, she brought out a tin of dried plum slices she'd been saving since last fall. Prescott accepted one, chewing it slow, watching her from across the table as the children dozed in the corner under a quilt. "Florence asked today if you were going to build your own house," Ada said, voice low. Prescott set the plum slice down. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know." He leaned back, hands resting on the edge of the chair. "I don't want my own house." Ada met his eyes. "Then what do you want?" "I want to finish mending the north fence. I want to see Finn take his first steps without falling into a chicken. I want to sit beside you in summer when the nights stretch long and the air smells like sage." He paused. "I want to stay here. With you." She stood slowly, walked to the stove, then turned back to face him, her hands resting on the iron handle. "You sure about that? This land doesn't give anything easy." "Neither do I." He rose from his chair, crossing the room with slow, even steps. "I don't want easy. I want what's true." She reached for his hand, fingers curling around his with a steadiness that told him everything he needed to know. "Then I reckon we ought to stop dancing around it." Outside, the wind had stilled. The mountains stood clean against the dusk, and the stars began to show, one by one. They married at the end of April. Ada stitched her own dress from linen she'd kept in a trunk, the fabric softened from years of waiting. Florence gathered wildflowers from the field behind the barn, arranging them into a crown that sat crooked on her mother's head. Finn wore a shirt that Prescott had sewn buttons onto himself, uneven but firm. They stood together beneath the cottonwood tree behind the house, the ground still damp beneath their boots, and said quiet vows with only the children and the wind as witness. There were no grand declarations, just simple truths laid bare. Ada promised to let him carry weight beside her. Prescott promised to never lay down the work of staying. Afterward, they shared cornbread and sweet tea on the porch while the children played with the dog that had wandered onto the property 2 weeks prior and decided not to leave. When the sun dipped low and the lanterns were lit, Ada leaned her head against Prescott's shoulder, her voice no louder than a breath. "I didn't think I'd ever have something that held." He wrapped his arm around her waist. "You do now." Years passed, marked not by hardship but by the quiet rhythm of days well lived. The garden grew straight and full. Prescott taught Florence how to saddle a horse without spooking it, and Ada taught Finn how to read from the old reader she'd once used herself. The house grew too, with a second room added on summer by summer, nails driven in by Prescott's hand and Ada's steady eye. When sickness came through the valley one winter, it took a neighbor and left sorrow heavy on the wind. Prescott sat up all night tending the fire while Ada nursed the children, her hands never trembling once. They pulled through, and when spring came again, They planted flowers in the neighbor's memory and left the gate open on Sundays in case anyone needed a place to sit. By the time Florence turned 12, she could shoot straighter than Prescott and bake a pie better than her mother, though she never said so out loud. Finn grew lean and quick, always asking questions, always underfoot. One late autumn evening, after the harvest was in and the cattle penned, Ada and Prescott sat on the porch with mugs of cider, the air cool and dry around them. She rested her feet on the railing, her dress hem brushing his boot. "You ever think about the road that brought you here?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said, "but not with longing." Ada smiled into her cup. "It's strange. I used to think love was something that came fast. Like thunder." He reached for her hand. "Turns out it's more like the soil. You keep tending it, and one day, you look up and see it's already blooming." She squeezed his hand once, slow and firm. "I'm glad you came when you did. I'm glad I stayed." And so they did. Through floods and frost, through the long hush of summer and the deep hush of snow, they stayed. Together, they raised children who knew the value of silence, of work, of standing shoulder to shoulder. They built a life not out of luck, but out of choice, and it held. Prescott never rode on again. Ada never stood alone. And every night, with the fire low and the stars stretching wide above the Pinal Mountains, they met each other in the quiet and said, without needing words, that they were home.